Hello guys, so welcome back to Not a Nerd. And in this tutorial, we are going to start with our C language. In the previous video, we had watched how to install the C GCC compiler, how to install MinGW, how to install VS Code and stuff. So from this video, we'll be starting officially with our C tutorial. So let's get that started, right? Right, guys. So, first of all, we'll start with what is C. So, in very layman terms, C is a procedure-oriented language. Now, what is a procedure-oriented language? There are two types of languages mostly used. So, one is procedure-oriented and one is object-oriented, right? So now procedure-oriented languages, they do not care much about the data. So the data, it does not matter where the data is coming from, where the data is going and stuff. Will only look into the procedures. So like work has to be done. Let's say I want to drink a glass of water. So I do not care about where the water came from or where does it go inside my body. I'll just think about the procedure part of it. So I'll get a glass. I will get the water from a tap. I'll drink that water, and that's it. That is the procedure part of it, right? So C does not give a lot of shits about what exactly data is or where is it coming from. The only thing is it is concerned with is what are we doing with that data, right? So that is procedure oriented language. There is another language called object oriented language. Now that part of it is basically object oriented languages deal is very data centric. So the only thing they care about or object oriented languages care about is where the data is coming from, what we are doing with the data, and where the data is going, right? So everything revolves around data in object oriented language. But in C, which is the procedure oriented language, we'll only look at the procedural part of it. So what are we doing with that data, right? So first, let's start with what data is. So data can be any piece of information, right? So let's say you have a name, you have a roll number, you have an address. So all of these are different types of data. Let's say you got some marks in maths. So that is a different kind of data, right? So data is any piece of information that we can process and we can get some meaningful information out of it, right? So that is what is data. Now, let's talk about data in layman terms, in non-programming terms. So if you see data, let's say I want to drink a glass of water, right? So what will I do? I'll just take a glass of, I'll take water. Now I need that water to be in a container that does not leak and can hold water, right? So now I cannot put it in a, let's say, a cloth bag and drink from there because it will probably leak out, right? So every data needs a container which can support that kind of data, right? So let's say if I want to let's say if I want to put sugar, so sugar I'll have to put in a plastic or a airtight container so that it does not get it does not get watery and I can use it for long, right? So every kind of data or every kind of item has a specific type of container, जिसमें it can prevail, right? So that is what data types are. So data types is basically a type of container जिसमें an item can prevail, right? So let's talk about it in non-programming terms first. So let's say I have some container and I want to put some item into it, right? I want to put water into it. So now that water has to be supported by the item, by the container, right? So I cannot just put water in this container if it has holes. The container, it needs to support this kind of water. Similarly, in C, the data has to be supported by the type of container that it is held in, right? So we have a certain set of data types which we'll move into. So first comes the integer. So now integer is a data type or it is the type of container which can store only integer values. So integer as in 2, 3, 4, -9, -7, negative and positive integer values can be stored in an int type of is an integer type of data and can be stored using int data. Similarly, we'll move to what double and float is. So double and float are used to store decimal data types, right? So you'll ask what is the difference between double and float? So more or less both of them are the same. Both of them are used to store decimal type of data, so fractions or decimals. But the difference is the precision part, right? So in double, if I store a decimal number, I can store up to 15 digits after the decimal point. But in float, I can store only up to 7 digits after the decimal point, right? So it is the only difference between these two is the amount of precision that they hold. Coming to the next data type, we have Boolean. So Boolean basically answers a yes or no type of question, right? So in different languages, Boolean has different terms. So in C, we have 0 and 1. So 0 represents no or a false, and 1 represents true or a yes. Similarly, if when we move to Python and other languages, Boolean data type. There's a key term called true and there's a key term called false. Both of these can be stored into Boolean data types. So this represents a yes and this represents a no, right? Moving to the next data type, we have characters. So character is any kind of data that is represented using a single quotes. As you can see, it has to have single quotes and it should have a single character inside it. So it can be an alphabet, it can be a numerical, a number, and it can be a star or any other symbol that we want, right? So it can be plus, minus, multiply, divide, any symbol. So now, one doubt that might arise here is this two. How is it different from this two, right? So when we are storing it as a character, it is not being stored with its numerical value. It is not being the two is right here. It does not represent the number two. It represents a character, basically a shape it represents basically a shape which might mean something, right? So this A is not actually an alphabet. It is just a symbol which might mean something in some language. So to add on to this, we can also have let's say a random symbol, a dollar symbol. So now the dollar symbol is a random symbol which might mean have some meaning in some language. So this too is used to represent a number, but this too is used to represent a symbol, a character which could mean anything, right? So that is the difference between characters and integers. Moving on last to the most famous data type we use, that is string. So string is nothing. String is basically used to store a collection of characters, right? So it is used to store number of characters all together, and it is represented using double quotes in C. So it is used to store a number of characters inside a single box, right? So now ये तो हो गया हम लोग का data type. This is the type of data. This is the example. That is what data can this type store. And this is the double of float, right? So moving on, what are variables? So data types and variables are very closely related topics. So let's see once again the water jar, the water container that we had made earlier. So like I said, if I want to store water, right? I need to have a box. I need to have a container which can support water and I will add water to it, right? So in this analogy, water is the data. The water is the data or the type or it is the data that I'm storing. The container that I see right here, right? So if I want this container, I will have to give it a name, right? So I'll give it a name, let's say A. So this container that is named A is storing my data, right? And like I said, every data has a data type. So every data needs to be stored in a container of that data type, right? So I will say it is an integer type data type or a water type data type. So I am what I have done basically, I have created a container whose name is A and which can store what kind of data? It can store an integer kind of data. And what is the data that I will put into it? It is integer, right? So this name that we have given to this container right here is called a variable, right? So this name that we have given to our data container right here is called a variable. Now, let's see what variables are. So, like I just explained, variable is any name or any container that stores a particular type of data That's all. So it is any name or a container that stores a particular kind of data. That is our variable, right? So I can have an integer data type storing an integer value. I can have a float data type variable, float data type variable. Let's say v, which stores uh, decimal kind of data. We can have a character kind of data type with a variable name, let's say C, which can store a character data type, right? So, like we just saw, uh, we can create any kind of variable having a specific data type, and we can store any particular data in it, right? So that is all about data types and variables. Let's go to our C terminal and see how this works, right? So VS Code. So, like I explained, let's see one thing. We'll first cross this all out. So, I've created a folder where we'll be storing all our information, or all the programming tutorials that we do. So, I'll just go into this folder, I'll right click and I'll click open in terminal, right? So, as soon as I click open in terminal, this should open a terminal with command prompt window, and I'll put code dot. What this code dot does is it opens VS Code, it opens Visual Studio Code in that particular folder. So if you can see right here, we are in the C tutorial folder where we had originally opened our command prompt, right? So now I can close this and we can create a file called tut1.c and we'll start coding in this. You can see all the files that you have created right here, tut1.c, and you can create new files using this, right? So if I name a file, let's say tutorial2.c, so it will create another file called tut. We'll delete this for now. We'll work with tutorial1.c. So like I just explained, data type, then the variable name, then the type of data that we want to store, right? So this is a very simple line, a single line of code that will create a variable of integer type and it will store the value, the data 5 in it. Now, for C language, we have one small thing that you have to understand, this section of code, right? So now let's say computers are very dumb, okay? Computers don't understand things until they are told until they are told things very specifically, right? So the guy who created computers, or the guy who created programming languages, he said a simple thing. He said जहां पे भी main दिखे, जहां पे भी मेन दिखे, वहां से यू स्टार्ट रनिंग द प्रोग्राम. सो मेन वाला जो हम लोग, this is basically called a function. We'll dive into what functions are in later videos. But the guy who created this coding language, he said कि जहां पे भी मेन लिखे, उसके अंदर का जितना कोड है, that is all you have to execute. मेन के अलावा ऊपर नीचे आगे पीछे जो कुछ भी है, leave that as it is. Just execute इतना सा section of the code, right? So जितना भी काम we will do inside our int main, which is basically a function. I'll tell you what this is. But whenever we are starting C, we have to write this syntax, and iske andar we will start coding our thing, right? So like I said, we can create a variable of type int a equal to 5. Similarly, we can create float, let's say f equal to 2.34. We can create a char variable, char c is equal to c is equal to a, for example. Or let's not confuse you guys, char c is equal to z. So what I've basically done right here, I've created a variable a of type integer, just now I've stored 5. Similarly, a variable f of type float, just now I've stored this value. A variable c of type character, just now I've stored this character z, right? So now if I try to print, now what is print? Print basically means an output statement, right? So what is my goal when I'm coding? My purpose of coding is to take an input, it is to process that input, and it is to give an output, right? So here, right here, we have inputted some data. So there is some data that we have input. Now we will process that data. Let's leave some section for processing. Processing. I'll write processing. So you have some section for processing, and then we want to give an output, right? So I'll take an output How do I output in C? I will use the command printf, right? So what this printf basically does is it takes some value inside of it, which it will print in the output, which it will print as the output, right? So I'll simply do this. I'll put a double quotes like we learned before. Double quotes is basically used to represent a string kind of data. So double quotes, I can put any string kind of data, right? So we'll put a double quotes and let's say we'll print hello world for now, right? So what I did, I took in some data, I processed it somewhere. I'm not going into the processing. Processing kuch nahi kiya basically. We have just inputted data and we have printed hello world, right? So we'll see how to run this first of all. We'll go and click on new terminal. Then what we have to do, we'll run GCC. If you can see my screen, GCC, and then we have to input the name of the file. So tut1.c, right? If I run this, it is showing that I have received an error of some kind, right? So let's see what that is about. I'll move, I'll include one small line right here. We'll see what these lines are in the next upcoming videos. So I wrote this line. I created a function. I created my input data and I created my output data. And now I'll try to run this line again. So GCC tut1.c. Now what this line basically does is it calls my GCC compiler or the C compiler on this particular file and it tells कि ये file को compile कर दो. So basically it just converted this file into machine language, right? So if you can see यहाँ पे a.exe बोल के एक file create हो गया. If I try to open this file, this is basically a set of binary digits. We won't be able to understand this because it is in computer language, right? So कुछ data है. As soon as I run this gcc tut1.c, it created this a.exe file. Now, this a.exe file is in low level or machine level language, right? So this can directly be understood by a computer. So what I'll do is I'll tell my computer to run this file. So I'll put dot slash a.exe dot slash a.exe, which is this file right here. This is how you run an output or a machine language file. So as you can see, as soon as I ran this, it printed hello world, right? Which is what my output was. So it ran through this process. It created these three variables and it printed hello world, which I received right here. As soon as my main function ends, you can see right here, since there is no lines of code remaining, this ends my program right here. And that's it. That's all I've done in this program, right? सो ऐसे हम लोग एक वेरिएबल क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, उनमें कुछ डेटा स्टोर कर सकते हैं. नाउ विल सी हाउ टू प्रिंट दैट डेटा. वेरी सिंपल, वेरी लेमन. How to print that data, right? So now every data type in C has a placeholder. We call these placeholders, right? So there's a percentage D, which is a placeholder for integer data types. Similarly, we have a percentage F, which is a placeholder for float data types. Similarly, we have a percentage C, which is for character data types, right? So every time I want to print some kind of data, I cannot just go यहाँ पे and I can type A, because if I do this, it will print hello world A. It won't go to this variable, right? So what I'll do is I'll place a placeholder right here. What this placeholder does is it tells my compiler कि इस पॉइंट पे कुछ डेटा आएगा. क्या डेटा आएगा वो नहीं पता, बट कुछ आएगा, तो ये जगह बचा के रख, राइट? सो ये जगह इन लोग बचा दिया. नाउ आई विल हैव टू सप्लाई द डेटा. So I'll put comma a. As you can see, I put a placeholder of integer type. Then I supplied a data, a variable of integer type. So इस placeholder की जगह पे ये डेटा जाके बैठ जाएगा, right? If I put, let's say, this is my number, my number. This is my number. And if I try to run this, so same way of running this, first I will save the file. So Control S, then I will gcc tut1.c, and then I'll run dot slash a.exe. Right? So now if I run this and if you focus on my terminal right here, it printed hello world. hello world, like in my code. Then it went for this percentage D. So percentage D, it tried to find a matching value, right? So percentage D ka matching value was A, which is my A equal to 5 variable right here. So ये A का value उठाया, इसको इधर बिठा दिया. So now you can see hello world 5 is printed, which was my A का value. And then उसके बाद it continued to print this whole thing. So this is my number, right? Similarly, if I do percentage F and I try to print my variable F, so I can do the same thing for any kind of variable I want. So I'll run gcc tut and run dot slash axe. Now you can see it printed hello world, my float variable data, and then my this is my number, right? Now you'll notice one thing. It has only 2.34, but this printed 2.34 and then four more zeros, right? So what is this about? So like I explained, a float data type can only store up to 7 digits, 7 significant figures. So right here we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 digits ka number. It automatically added the zeros at the end so that to make it 7 digits and we can print it. Similarly, if we try to print C, a character, we can print it like this. So control S, GCC put 1 and then dot slash AXE. So as you can see, our character C had a type of, had a variable Z, and that is what we'll be printing right here. So hello world, then placeholder. So this placeholder's value will come from here. So it printed Z, and then this is my number. So it printed this is my number, right? So this is all about printing data types, how to create a data variable, how to store some data in it, and how to print that data, right? Next
We
video, we
haven't
will learn
touched
the
about
processing
how to
part, convert
processing we
between
will do in
from
later
one
videos.
variable to another. We learn how to
Right?
process or
So this is all we
calculate or
have done.
evaluate some values using these data types or these variables, and we learn how to print those. Right? We are learning from the very scratch. So if you guys have any doubt in this stage of the video, except for this line, which we will cover later on, if you have any doubt in this section of the video, then you can leave your doubts in the comments below, and I'll get back to you guys. But this is what we have learned, right? So let's keep this till for now, and we'll move on to the next video tomorrow. See you guys there, and thank you for joining Not Alone.